I cheated on my amazing husband, left him for the person I had an affair with, and now karma has come full circle. My best friend ended up marrying him. Hey everyone. Before we get into today's story, I could use your help. The channel's been struggling a bit lately, and subscribing is one of the easiest ways to show your support. It's quick, free, and helps us keep bringing you great content. Your support means everything. Let's keep this community growing. Thank you so much. Now, let's dive in. Hey guys, I've been quietly following this subreddit for a while, reading other people's stories without ever thinking I'd be writing my own. Yet, here I am, sharing the mess I've made of my life. I'm not sure if I'm looking for advice, criticism, or just the chance to lay everything out and confront my mistakes. Either way, here goes. A few years ago, I, 34F, had what most people would consider the ideal life. I was married to Lucas. He wasn't just a good husband, he was the husband, the kind of partner people envy. My best friend from college, Ashley, 34F, would often remind me how lucky I was to have him. Men like Lucas don't come around often, she'd say. And she was right. Lucas was patient, hard-working, and the best father to our daughter, Lily. He'd come home from his demanding IT job and still make time to read Lily bedtime stories or help her build forts in the living room. He even did funny voices while reading, and Lily adored it. He was the kind of man who made family his top priority. Whether it was helping Lily with her schoolwork, cooking dinner, or planning small family outings, Lucas was dependable and selfless. Life with him was stable, comforting, and honestly, close to perfect. But apparently, perfect wasn't enough for me. Somewhere along the way, I started feeling restless, maybe even bored. I hate admitting it, but I began to take Lucas for granted. He was so consistent, so predictable, and I convinced myself that I needed more excitement in my life. Looking back now, I realize how foolish that was. The stability I found dull at the time was actually love and security, but I was too blind to see it. Around that time, I started venting to Ashley. I'd tell her how stuck I felt, how every day seemed like a copy of the last. I know Lucas is amazing, I'd say, but it feels like I'm just going through the motions. Ashley would always try to ground me. That's just how marriage is, she'd reply. You're not dating anymore. It's about building something real. I nodded along, but her words didn't really sink in. Deep down, I didn't want them to. That's when Dylan entered the picture. He worked at a small cafe near my office, where I'd often grab coffee during lunch. At first, he was just the friendly barista who remembered my order. He had this magnetic charm, loud, confident, and full of outrageous stories. People seemed to gravitate toward him. Compared to Lucas, who was calm and steady, Dylan was a completely different energy. He was bold, vibrant, and always the center of attention, and I couldn't help but be drawn to that. Initially, it was nothing more than casual chats while I waited for my coffee. Then it turned into shared jokes. One day, while telling me a funny story about a customer trying to pay with Monopoly money, he leaned in slightly and said with a grin, "You have a great laugh, you know that?" The way he spoke made my stomach flip in a way I hadn't felt in years. For a moment, I forgot I was married. Before long, I was going to that cafe every lunch break, not just for the coffee, but to see him. I told myself it was harmless, just a bit of fun to break up the monotony of my day. But deep down, I knew I was lying to myself. I liked how Dylan made me feel, noticed, special, and even a little rebellious. Lucas didn't make me feel that way anymore, but to be fair, he didn't need to. He was busy working hard and keeping our family together while I was chasing a fleeting thrill. Things escalated quicker than I expected. Dylan started texting me outside of work. At first, just memes or funny comments about my day. It seemed innocent, but the messages grew more flirtatious over time. I didn't stop it. In fact, I encouraged it. It felt exhilarating, like I was living a secret double life. I know how awful that sounds, and trust me, I despise myself for it now. I mentioned Dylan to Ashley once, casually recounting a funny story he'd told me. "He sounds like trouble," she said with a smirk, "but entertaining trouble." At the time, I didn't think much of it. I didn't tell her how often I was going to the cafe or how much I looked forward to seeing him. I convinced myself it wasn't a big deal. One day, Dylan invited me to lunch outside of the cafe. I knew it was crossing a line, but I agreed. He was over the top and ridiculous, but in the moment it felt like an escape from my mundane life with Lucas. After that, lunch dates became more frequent, and I found myself smiling at my phone whenever his texts came through. I can't pinpoint exactly when things turned physical, but I know it was entirely my doing. Dylan never pressured me. In fact, I was the one who made the first move. I remember feeling exhilarated, like I was breaking free from all the rules that had been holding me back. The guilt was definitely there. Every time I saw Lucas at home helping Lily with her math homework or folding laundry without a single complaint, I felt like the worst person alive. But the more time I spent with Dylan, the more it felt like I was betraying myself by staying with Lucas. I convinced myself that I deserved happiness and freedom. One night, everything unraveled. I told Lucas I had to work late, which wasn't unusual for me. He didn't question it because he trusted me completely. That evening, I went to Dylan's place, a small, cluttered studio that smelled like stale coffee and cheap cologne. It wasn't glamorous, but at the time it felt thrilling. When I got home, Lucas was waiting for me. He was sitting on the couch, holding my work bag. My stomach dropped. I realized I'd forgotten it at home in my rush to see Dylan. Trying to act normal, I said I was exhausted and needed to shower, but Lucas wasn't buying it. "Did you forget something?" he asked, his voice calm but sharp. He emptied the bag onto the floor, and there it was, a cafe receipt with a timestamp from earlier that night. My heart raced as I scrambled for an explanation, but I couldn't think of anything convincing. "Who is he?" Lucas asked, his tone steady and controlled. He didn't shout or accuse, he just wanted the truth. But I couldn't give it to him. I stood there, frozen, as the weight of my actions came crashing down on me. Lucas didn't push for answers. He didn't yell or lose his temper. He simply got up, looked me directly in the eye, and said, "I trusted you." Then, without another word, he went upstairs. I stood there in the living room, overwhelmed by a mix of guilt, panic, and, embarrassingly, relief. A selfish part of me thought, at least the secret's out now, but I couldn't even begin to process the damage I'd done to my family. The days following Lucas's confrontation were a blur. He didn't say much, and his silence was worse than any argument could have been. He moved around the house like a ghost, still doing his usual chores, helping Lily with her schoolwork, and even picking up tasks I'd neglected. But he only spoke to me when absolutely necessary. I was at a loss for what to do. Part of me wanted to confess everything, to apologize and beg for forgiveness. But another part of me thought this was my chance to escape the life I'd grown so tired of. I convinced myself that this was an opportunity to start fresh and find the happiness I thought I was missing. The turning point came one night after Lily had gone to bed. Lucas sat me down, his voice calm but distant, and said, "I think it's best if we separate." He looked me straight in the eye, and I could tell he'd spent days deciding what to say. I didn't argue or cry. I didn't beg or try to fix things. Instead, I simply nodded, as if I'd been waiting for him to say those words. Lucas didn't ask about Dylan or press for details. He just said he'd stay until we figured out the logistics of separating. Here's the hard truth. I felt relieved. I hate admitting that now, but at the time I genuinely believed I was doing the right thing. I thought I was letting Lucas go so he could find someone who truly appreciated him, and I told myself I was finally getting the freedom I craved. A few weeks later, we filed for divorce. Lucas didn't put up a fight except when it came to custody of Lily. He wanted shared custody, but I pushed for full custody. I argued in court that I was her primary caregiver, that I had the flexibility to meet her needs, and that she'd be better off with me full-time. Lucas didn't contest much. He simply said, "If that's what's best for Lily, I'll respect it." At the time, I saw his lack of resistance as him giving up, as proof he didn't care enough to fight for her. Now I understand he was just trying to keep things civil for Lily's sake. After the papers were finalized and Lucas moved out, I thought I'd finally feel free. Dylan moved in a few weeks later, and at first it was everything I thought I wanted. We spent our days laughing, watching movies, and doing whatever we felt like. He made me feel young and carefree, like I was living the life I'd always wanted. At first, Lily didn't seem to mind. She was too young to fully grasp what was happening, and Dylan made an effort to be kind to her. He'd bring her little gifts and joke with her during dinner. I convinced myself we were creating a new kind of family, different, but just as good as what I'd left behind. But things changed quickly. The carefree attitude I had found so exciting in Dylan began to feel like irresponsibility. He struggled to keep a job and always had excuses for why it wasn't his fault. His boss was unfair, or the schedule didn't work for him. He bounced from one gig to another, rarely staying anywhere for more than a month or two. At first, I ignored it. I told myself it wasn't a big deal because I had a steady job and could support us. But soon, the bills began to pile up. Dylan's once charming stories turned into constant complaints about how life was unfair. His charisma started to wear thin, and the stress began to show. Lily started noticing the tension. She'd ask questions like, "Why doesn't Dylan go to work?" Or, "Why is he always tired?" I didn't know how to answer without making excuses, so I avoided the topic entirely. The breaking point came when Dylan borrowed money from me to cover his car payment. He promised to repay me with his next paycheck, but that paycheck never came. Instead, he used the money to buy a new gaming console, claiming he needed it to unwind. When I confronted him, he laughed it off. "You're stressing over nothing," he said. "We're fine." But we weren't fine. I was draining my savings to pay for rent, groceries, and daycare, while Dylan spent his days playing video games and complaining about how unfair the world was. I began to resent Dylan, but I didn't know how to change things. I felt like I had trapped myself in a situation with no way out. I couldn't go back to Lucas and admit I had made a terrible mistake, and I couldn't leave Dylan without creating even more chaos in my life. One evening, after an especially tough day at work, I came home to find Dylan passed out on the couch, surrounded by empty takeout containers. Lily was on the floor, working on her homework alone. "Where's Dylan?" I asked her. She looked up and replied, "He said he was tired." Something inside me broke. I realized this wasn't the life I wanted for my daughter. I had taken her away from a stable, loving home and brought her into this mess. For what? For someone who couldn't even bother to help her with her schoolwork. I wanted to call Lucas and beg for his forgiveness, to ask him to take us back, but I couldn't. I was too ashamed and afraid to face the consequences of my actions. Instead, I pushed my feelings aside and tried to convince myself things would improve with Dylan, that he just needed time to get his act together. But deep down, I knew I was lying to myself again. The freedom I had once craved had turned into a prison of my own making, and the worst part was that I had no one to blame but myself. I didn't know how to cope. Lily was asking for her dad more often, and every time she brought him up, it felt like a knife twisting in my chest. She would ask questions like, "Why doesn't Daddy visit anymore?" Or, "Can I call him?" I never stopped her from calling him, and every time she did, Lucas's voice was warm and steady. The complete opposite of the chaos I was trying so hard to hide. I could tell he missed her, even though he never said it outright. He didn't have to. No matter what, he always made time to talk to Lily, and every conversation they had made me feel worse. Meanwhile, Dylan wasn't stepping up the way I'd imagined he would. I had envisioned this new life where he would be an engaged partner and a fun stepdad, but instead he spent most of his time on the couch, glued to his phone or playing video games. I was left to juggle work, bills, and Lily's needs on my own. One night, everything came to a head. I got home from work, completely drained, only to find that Dylan hadn't done a single thing all day. The sink was overflowing with dirty dishes, Lily's homework was untouched, and Dylan was sitting on the couch, surrounded by snack wrappers. I snapped. "Can you help me out for once? I can't do everything," I shouted. He shrugged and replied, "You're the one who wanted this. I didn't sign up to be a babysitter." That word, babysitter, hit me like a ton of bricks. Lily wasn't some random child. She was my daughter, and our family wasn't supposed to feel like a burden to him. I locked myself in the bathroom and cried because I didn't want Lily to see me like that. The next day, Lily asked me why Dylan never helped her with her schoolwork. She wasn't being mean, just curious. I didn't know what to say, so I changed the subject. But the guilt kept eating away at me. This wasn't the life I had promised her when I fought for custody. That night, after Lily was asleep, I decided to call Lucas. I hadn't spoken to him directly since the custody hearing. He picked up on the third ring, and just hearing his voice was a mix of relief and shame. "What's wrong?" he asked, skipping any pleasantries. He always had a way of knowing when something wasn't right. "I can't do this anymore," I blurted out. "I made a huge mistake, Lucas. I thought I wanted this life, but I didn't realize how good I had it with you. I need help. Lily needs you." There was a long pause, and I could hear him sigh on the other end. "What do you want me to do?" he asked, his voice calm but distant. I wasn't ready for that question. I didn't even know what I wanted. Maybe I thought he'd say he'd come back, that he'd forgive me, and we'd figure everything out together. But instead, he waited for me to answer. When I couldn't, he finally said, "I'm always here for Lily, but I can't fix this for you. You made your choices." His words stung. I tried to explain, to tell him how sorry I was, but he cut me off. "You don't need to apologize to me. You need to figure out how to be the mom Lily deserves." The call ended shortly after that, and I sat there staring at my phone, feeling more lost than ever. Lucas hadn't yelled or insulted me. He didn't even sound angry. He just sounded done. The next day, I tried to put on a brave face for Lily, but inside I was falling apart. I had lost the one person who had always been my safety net, and I knew I had thrown it all away for someone who didn't care about me or my daughter. Dylan, of course, had no clue about the call. That evening, he spent his time complaining about how his job search wasn't going well and how life was unfair. A week later, I packed Lily into the car and drove 2 hours to Lucas's new place. I didn't call ahead because I knew he wouldn't agree to see me if I did. When he opened the door, he looked surprised to see us. Lily ran into his arms, hugging him tightly. I wanted to hug him too, but I couldn't. We sat down in his living room, and I poured my heart out. I told him everything, about Dylan, the financial struggles, the stress, and how much I regretted the choices I'd made. "I know I don't deserve it, but I need your help. I want to make things right for Lily's sake," I said, choking back tears. Lucas listened without interrupting, his expression calm but unmoving. When I finished, he shook his head. "I'm sorry you're struggling," he said, "but I can't be the solution to your problems. Lily is my priority, and she always will be. But you and I, that chapter is over." I begged him to reconsider, to let me prove. I thought I could change. I even suggested that we try therapy, but Lucas stood his ground. "You made your choice, and I've made mine," he said. "Lily needs stability, and that's not going to come from us pretending we can go back to what we had." That night, I drove home feeling like I'd hit rock bottom. When I got back, Dylan was asleep on the couch, completely unaware of what had just happened. I looked at him and realized I couldn't stand the sight of him anymore. I had given up a kind, stable man and a secure life for this, for someone who didn't even care enough to clean up after himself. I felt heartbroken and utterly lost. I wanted someone to hold me, to tell me everything would be okay. All I could think about was Lucas, because he was always the person I turned to when I felt adrift. But now, he wasn't even answering my calls. I didn't know what to do. Should I try to convince Lucas to reconsider? Maybe he still had feelings for me. How could I know? Tell me what you think and I'll update you soon. Hi again, everyone. I never expected things to spiral so far out of control, but somehow it's even worse than I could have imagined. After that night with Lucas, when he firmly shut the door on any chance of us fixing things, I went home feeling utterly shattered. I felt like there was no way forward, no direction, and no path to reclaim even a semblance of normalcy. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of Dylan yelling at his video game. He was completely oblivious to how broken our lives had become. Sitting on the edge of the bed, I took in the chaos around me. A sink full of dirty dishes, unopened bills scattered across the counter, and piles of laundry collecting dust in the corner. This was my life now. It felt suffocating and I didn't even know where to start. Lily was still asleep, so I decided to try talking to Dylan again. I told him we needed to make a plan because I couldn't keep carrying all the weight by myself. He barely looked at me and muttered, "I'm trying, okay? Do you think I like being stuck like this?" His tone was defensive and dismissive, and it made me feel insignificant. I wanted to argue, to demand he step up, but I didn't have the energy. I let it go because fighting with him felt like a waste of time. But things didn't just stay bad. They got worse. Dylan became even more withdrawn, irritable, and unmotivated. He'd promised to look for a job, but instead, he spent hours glued to his games or scrolling through his phone. Meanwhile, I was working longer and longer hours just to keep us afloat. Every day, I came home feeling more drained, and every time I saw him lounging around like he didn't have a care in the world, my resentment grew. Then, the debt collectors started calling. My credit cards were maxed out, and the calls became relentless. Every time my phone buzzed, my stomach twisted in knots. Dylan didn't seem to care. "Just tell them you'll pay later," he said with a shrug, as if it were a minor inconvenience instead of a full-blown crisis. That was when I realized how out of touch, or in denial, he really was about our situation. One night, after yet another fight about money, Dylan stormed out. I didn't know where he went, and honestly, I didn't care. Sitting alone in the silence, I felt completely trapped. I couldn't go back to Lucas. I couldn't keep living like this, and I couldn't pretend Dylan was going to suddenly change. When he finally came home hours later, something was off. He was jittery, his eyes darting around like he was expecting someone to burst through the door. At first, I thought he was drunk or high, but it was worse. He admitted he had borrowed money from some shady people, a gang or loan sharks, I wasn't sure, and now he owed them a lot. When I pressed him for details, he brushed me off, saying, "It's fine, I'll handle it." But he didn't handle it. A few days later, they started coming to the house. They'd pound on the door, shouting for Dylan to come out. Sometimes he wasn't even home, and I had to face them alone. It was terrifying. I started keeping the curtains closed and told Lily never to answer the door. My anxiety was through the roof, and every knock made my heart race. Then Dylan made everything worse. After another argument about money, he pulled out a small bag of pills and said, "You need to chill out. Try one." I should have kicked him out right then and there. I should have told him to leave and never come back. But I was so overwhelmed, so desperate for a way to escape, that I didn't. I took the pill. Just one. But one quickly turned into two, then three. Before I knew it, I was using regularly. It became my way to cope, to dull the constant stress and shame. Dylan, of course, encouraged it. He acted like it was something we were doing together, like it was normal. I hated myself for it, but stopping felt impossible. Every time I tried, the anxiety came rushing back, and I'd cave. Lily noticed. She didn't say anything at first, but I could see it in her eyes. The worry, the confusion. She didn't understand what was happening, but she knew something was wrong. She started pulling away, spending more time in her room or asking to stay over at a friend's house. Every time she looked at me like she didn't recognize who I'd become, it broke my heart. I kept telling myself I'd quit, that I'd get my act together and fix everything. But the longer it went on, the harder it became. The stress, the guilt, the shame, it all felt impossible to overcome. Every time I tried to stop, I'd spiral right back. One night after Lily had gone to bed, I picked up my phone and called Ashley. She'd always been the one person I could rely on to listen, even when my life was a mess. She'd been distant lately, but I figured she was just busy with work, as usual. I didn't think much of it when Ashley picked up the phone. As soon as she answered, I started unloading everything. How Dylan wasn't contributing, how the debt collectors were becoming more relentless, and how much I was struggling to quit using. "I just don't know what to do anymore," I said, barely holding back tears. "I feel like I'm drowning. And Lily, she's starting to notice. I can't even look at her without feeling like the worst mother in the world." Ashley was silent for a moment, and when she finally spoke, her voice was calm and deliberate. "You need real help, not just talking to me. Have you considered therapy or rehab?" I brushed her suggestion aside. "I don't have time for that. I just need things to settle down, and then I'll figure it out. I'm trying, Ash. I really am." There was a long pause before she said something that made my stomach drop. "I can't keep this to myself anymore. I have to tell Lucas." My heart started pounding. "What?" "No, you can't do that, Ashley. Please, I'm working on it. I don't need him coming in and making things worse." "It's not about you," she snapped, her tone sharp and unyielding. "It's about Lily. She's a child, and she's stuck in the middle of all this chaos. You told me yourself, you're struggling to stop. What happens if things get worse? What if she gets caught in the crossfire? I can't just sit back and do nothing." I lost it. I yelled, I pleaded, I accused her of betraying me. But Ashley didn't waver. "I love you," she said, her voice softening. "But I love Lily too. And right now, she's the one who needs help. I'm sorry, but I can't ignore this." When the call ended, I sat on the couch, trembling. My mind raced with dread about what would happen if Lucas found out. I knew Ashley wouldn't lie or sugarcoat anything. She would tell him everything, and Lucas wouldn't let it slide. The next few days were a blur of panic. I checked my phone constantly, expecting a message or call from Lucas, but there was nothing, just silence. I couldn't tell if he was planning something or if Ashley hadn't gone through with it yet. So here I am, writing this post, hoping someone can give me advice. I feel completely broken and terrified. "Hi, everyone. Here's the update, though I'm not exactly in the best headspace to write it, but at least getting this out might help me process." The fallout hit harder than I could have imagined. 2 days after my conversation with Ashley, Lucas showed up at the house. I didn't even hear his car pull up, just a sharp knock at the door that made my heart race. When I opened it and saw him standing there, I froze. He looked calm, but it was the kind of calm that made you feel like the ground beneath you was about to collapse. He didn't say anything at first, just looked past me into the house. I knew exactly what he was seeing. The mess, the chaos, the life I had let spiral out of control. Finally, he broke the silence. "Where's Lily?" I stammered something about her being in her room, but he didn't wait for me to finish. He walked past me and went to find her. I followed him, my heart pounding, but I had no idea what to say or do. A few minutes later, he came out of her room, and Lily was holding a small bag of her belongings. She looked confused and scared. "Mom?" she asked, her voice trembling. I tried to reassure her, to tell her everything was fine, but Lucas cut me off. "She's coming with me," he said, his tone firm and unyielding. "No, Lucas, please," I begged, stepping in front of him. You can't just take her from me. Let's talk about this. I'll fix everything, I promise. He looked at me, and for the first time I saw just how angry and disappointed he was. Don't, he said, his voice low but sharp. You've had your chances. I'm not leaving her here while you figure out how to get your life together. I begged him, tears streaming down my face, but he wouldn't budge. He opened the door and walked out, Lily clutching his hand. She looked back at me, her eyes full of confusion and fear, and it felt like my heart was being ripped out of my chest. After they left, I collapsed onto the floor. I tried calling Lucas, texting him, emailing him, anything to get him to listen. I promised I'd get help, that I'd do whatever it took to make things right, but he never responded. Not once. Now I'm sitting in this empty house, surrounded by the mess I created, wondering if I'll ever be able to fix any of it. I've lost everything, my marriage, my stability, my daughter, and the worst part is knowing that it's all my fault. Hi, it's been a while since I last posted. Life has been such a mess that it's taken me a month to even write this. Since Lucas walked out with Lily, I haven't been able to stop thinking about that day. The silence in this house is suffocating. I've spent countless hours staring at my phone, waiting for any sign from Lucas. Anything to let me know how Lily is doing, even if it's just to tell me he hates me. But there's been nothing. It's like I've been erased from their lives. I've been trying to keep myself together, but each day feels harder than the last. I started therapy, which Ashley had suggested before all this happened, but it feels like a drop in the ocean. Too little, too late. My therapist keeps telling me to focus on rebuilding myself before I can rebuild anything else. But honestly, that feels impossible when all I want is to have Lily back. A few days ago, I finally broke down and decided to reach out to Ashley again. I hadn't spoken to her since our argument, and I wasn't even sure if she'd answer, but I had to try. When I called, she picked up after a couple of rings. "Hey," I said, my voice shaky. "I know I've been a mess lately, but I just need someone to talk to." She sighed on the other end of the line. "What do you want to talk about?" Ashley asked. "Everything," I said, my voice trembling. "I'm trying to get better. I've started therapy. I know I treated you horribly, but I just need to know. Have you heard anything from Lucas? Has he said anything about Lily?" There was a long pause, and I could hear her breathing as though she was trying to decide how to answer. Finally, she spoke, her tone careful and deliberate. "We need to talk in person. Can you come over?" I was both surprised and relieved. "Yeah, of course," I said quickly, already grabbing my keys. When I arrived at her apartment, she opened the door with a small, hesitant smile. I could tell she wasn't thrilled to see me, but at least she was letting me in. We sat down, and I immediately poured out everything I'd been holding in, how I was working on staying clean, how therapy was helping, and how much I missed Lily to the point it physically hurt. Ashley listened silently, her expression unreadable. When I finally stopped, she said, "I'm glad you're trying to turn things around, but there's something you need to know." My stomach tightened. "What is it?" She hesitated before saying, "Lucas and we've been talking a lot lately, about everything, about Lily, about you, and we're together now." I stared at her, struggling to process what I'd just heard. "What do you mean, together?" "I mean, we're dating," she replied. "It wasn't planned and it didn't happen right away. But after everything came out, we reconnected. It just happened. It felt like the air had been knocked out of me. My best friend, my only friend, was now with the man I still loved. "You've got to be kidding me," I said, my voice shaking. "How could you do this to me, Ashley?" After everything I've been through, her expression hardened. "This isn't about you. It's about Lucas and Lily. They need stability, and I can give them that. I'm not the one who ruined their lives. You did." Her words stung, but I couldn't argue with her. She was right. I was the one who had destroyed everything, and now she was stepping in to pick up the pieces. "I trusted you," I said weakly, tears streaming down my face. "I tried to help you," she shot back. I gave you every opportunity to get it together, and you didn't. Lucas deserves someone who can actually be there for him and Lily. I left her apartment feeling numb. I couldn't even cry on the way home. I was too stunned. But as soon as I got back to the house, the weight of it all hit me. I collapsed onto the couch, sobbing so hard I could barely breathe. Ashley had been my anchor for years, and now she was with the man I had thrown away. A part of me wanted to lash out, to call Lucas and scream at him for moving on so fast. But what would that accomplish? He didn't owe me anything. I had no right to be angry or jealous, not after what I'd done. Instead, I took out my frustration on Dylan. When I got home, he was sitting on the couch as usual, surrounded by his usual mess of snack wrappers and empty cans. He didn't even look up when I walked in. That was the breaking point. "This is all your fault," I yelled, slamming the door behind me. "You've done nothing but drag me down since the day I met you." Dylan looked up, startled at first, but then he smirked like it was all a joke. "Oh, here we go," he said, leaning back and crossing his arms. "Blame me for your problems. Real mature." I didn't care anymore. "You're a loser, Dylan. You've done nothing but leech off me while I've tried to hold everything together. You think this is funny? My life is ruined because of you." He laughed, a hollow, cruel laugh that made my blood boil. "Your life was already a mess before I came along. Don't blame me for your screw-ups. You're the one who cheated on your husband. You're the one who let everything fall apart. Don't act like I'm the reason your kid got taken away." His words cut deep because I knew there was some truth to them. I stood there, shaking with rage, but I didn't know how to respond. Finally, I managed to say, "Get out. Get out of my house." Dylan stood up, towering over me, and for a moment I thought he might actually leave. But then he shrugged and said, "No, I think you're the one who should go. You're lucky I've let you stick around this long." Before I could reply, he grabbed my bag from the counter, shoved a few of my things into it, and tossed it at me. "Take your drama somewhere else," he said, smirking again. "I don't have time for this." I wanted to scream, to fight back, but I felt the tears welling up in my eyes. I grabbed the bag and left without another word. I didn't even take everything, just what I could carry. I felt like a ghost as I walked out of the house I'd once believed would be a fresh start. I spent the next hour driving aimlessly, trying to figure out where to go. I couldn't go to Lucas, not after everything that had happened. I couldn't go back to Ashley, not that I'd want to. In desperation, I called an old friend I hadn't spoken to in years. I was mortified but begged her to let me crash on her couch. Now I'm staying with her, trying to figure out how to rebuild my life. She's kind, but I can tell she's uncomfortable having me here, and I don't blame her. I wouldn't want me here either. I can't stop picturing Ashley and Lucas together, happy and stable, while I'm stuck in this mess I created. I wonder if Lily likes Ashley more than me now, if she sees her as the mother she wishes I could have been. This morning I finally found the courage to email Lucas. I didn't mention Ashley, I couldn't bring myself to. I just asked how Lily was doing and if I might be able to see her soon. I stared at my inbox for hours, refreshing it over and over, waiting for a reply. When his response finally came, my hands shook as I opened it. It was short, just a few lines. "Lily is doing well. She's happy and adjusting to the changes. For now, I think it's best for you to focus on yourself and getting better before we discuss visitation. I'll keep you updated. Take care." I read it over and over, searching for some hidden meaning, some glimmer of hope. But it was clear. Lucas wasn't ready to let me back into their lives. And why would he be? He has Ashley now. He doesn't need me anymore. Now I sit here, surrounded by the emptiness I created, realizing that the freedom I chased was nothing more than a one-way ticket to losing everything that truly mattered. I had a life, a real one, and I threw it all away for nothing.